welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. On Sundays, we talk about one of the least popular and least discussed intelligence, which is spiritual intelligence. And tonight is no exception. Happy Sunday. We are diving into a topic which I'm so excited to be discussing with you: how to live free, moving away from the laws of should. I grew up in a very conservative environment, and there was a lot of shoulds in my periphery. In the external world, there was a lot coming from my parents, coming from our religious structure, coming from the pulpit. And a lot of my orientation was looking to everyone around me to tell me how to live. They were giving me the metrics of success, let's say. And as I was living that way, so much of my guiding system was informed by the horizontal lens. So effectively, if we think of it as kind of a navigational system, my compass was magnetized east and west rather than navigating north. I was just sitting outside looking at the sky, and I saw these really bright stars. And as I was just kind of gazing at them, I noticed that they were starting to move, like very, very slowly moving. And I was like, oh, those are planes. And I live very close to Washington Reagan Airport in DC. And as I was watching these planes, these tiny little specks in the sky, take off, I started also seeing these other planes lower in the hemisphere that had just taken off from the airport close by. And I just was noticing how, the ones up in the sky were just so far away and so above the atmosphere that they were just so tiny. And the ones lower down, it was so evident that they were planes, but they are all operating from a different navigational system. The ones lower to the ground are needing to navigate buildings, they're needing to navigate other planes, whereas the ones in the sky are kind of operating and orienting on their own orbit, on their own navigational system. And so it made me just start thinking, what is the navigational system that's guiding our life, that's guiding our own orbit? Are we operating kind of at that lower hemisphere, trying to navigate planes and trying to navigate the things around us? Or are we really able to be up and above and be navigating at our own navigational system because we know where we're going? And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, okay, well, what are our navigational systems? Are they the systems that were handed to us by other people, by our parents, by the religious settings that we grew up in? Or are we the ones actually pulling the strings of our own life? And the navigational system that should be the one encompassing our life are our own ideals, our values, our visions, our goals, and the things that we have intentionally set forth for our lives. But if we don't do that work of identifying and creating our own navigational system, we're going to be maintaining a compass that's navigating east and west rather than pointed north. So I just want to take a quick moment before I continue to check in with some of the comments here. I'm live on a couple of different streaming platforms, but just wanted to say hello and good evening to Brian. Life is fun. Thanks for coming. James Dillon, good to see you. Joe Jor. No, you said you think we've been to the moon. Yes, I think so. Anna, thank you for coming on here tonight. Larry, Joe Jor, thank you again. I just saw your next comment, Larry. Turn V, thank you so much for joining. John, y'all, I'm super excited to be chatting about this tonight because the work that I have been doing over the last couple of years to ensure that my navigational system is one informed by me is and has been one that honestly has taken a lot of time. And it doesn't mean that this new navigational system that I'm creating is void of anything that I grew up with and grew up in. Instead, it's taking and intentionally choosing what I want to take with me on this journey of life and creating a navigational system that pulls with intention the best of the best to shape who I become. Because every single decision that we make today is going to inform the rest of our lives. All these little decisions that we're making every minute of the day all compound to be the person that we are at the end of our lives. When I turned 30, I wrote my eulogy, and it really was a good mirror for me to examine, am I actually living today in accordance to be this person I want to be at the end of my life? Am I actually setting in place the systems and structures that will allow for me to one day be that person? Um, and so it was really important that, this concept of shoulds was taken into examination, not just as I've been doing this work, but on a daily basis. In fact, I was chatting with a friend tonight on the phone, and I was just reminded once again that this question of what are my KPIs? What are the key performance indicators that I'm using in my life to determine whether I'm heading in the right direction or not? Because if we're not the ones setting those KPIs, and KPIs is a term usually used in business to help people decide, okay, are we heading towards the vision or away from it? So likewise, we should be setting our own KPIs for our life to determine if we're heading in the direction that we want to go. And this constant examination of whose value system am I abiding by? Is it mine or is it somebody else's? Is so important, because otherwise we're going to end up living according to someone else's life and where they're headed rather than where we're supposed to be headed. And so we have to gain so much clarity across these different levels of analysis around, where do I want to even end up? This is the exercise of writing our eulogy that is so incredibly valuable. And then, do I have the clarity of my own values that can serve as guardrails to power me forward into that person and into that life? And the guardrails of values are also accompanied by boundaries. What are the boundaries that I need to put in place to contain me and keep me headed in the direction that I feel called to? There's this scripture that I absolutely love. It's Psalm 16, verse 11, which says, "The boundary lines have fallen for me in beautiful places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance." And I love that concept of boundaries being beautiful. And there's a lot of peace that comes with that, because for so much of the time we view boundaries, and I hear people talk about boundaries in a way that actually is almost self-serving, and it's actually keeping people out rather than considering boundaries as a way to keep and preserve us on our journey, that also allows us to love better. When I am walking in alignment, when I am with my compass navigating north, I actually have so much more capacity to give to other people and love others so much better than if I was solely focused on everyone else and actually giving from a place of depletion. Now I'm able to be Christene Marie and operate in alignment with who I want to be, who I'm called to be, and frankly, fulfill on the very things that I was uniquely created here to do. And each one of us has a unique opportunity, a unique call on our lives to make an impact, to love others so well, to be that little piece of God that is here in the world. On Sundays, we talk about spiritual intelligence. I love just the concept, the analogy. Yesterday, we talked about the allegories of our lives. I love the allegory in the life of Jesus as depicted in the Bible, where he's, was living so powerfully and healing people and loving people so well. And then he says, it's actually better for me to go away so that the little piece of me, the piece of Christ, can live in every single one of us. And each one of us can then have the power to make that kind of impact that he made while he was living on earth. And that is so incredibly cool, whether you believe in the literal story of Jesus coming versus just looking at the allegory of his life and what are the hidden meanings represented for each one of us to take away. So many stories and so many lives have hidden meanings and hidden allegories for us to draw forth and drive so much meaning from that. And so if that's true, that there's a piece of God, a piece of Christ in every single one of us, then we have so much responsibility to examine, am I living in a way that is allowing for me to be as powerful and as impactful, so that the presence of God here on earth isn't just in one person, it's through all of us. Am I actually living worthy of that? Am I actually believing that for me? And I'll just go there. But one of the reasons why I actually struggle with going to a lot of different churches these days is because they don't talk about that. They don't live like that. They live small and meek and docile, and, oh, well, we're just waiting for this savior. And it's like, no, God's in us. We have so much power to make an impact in every area of our lives with every person we come across. I've been editing my book Knowing that's hopefully going to be coming out this spring, maybe this summer, but I've been working on that today, and it just reminded me that this radical responsibility to ensure that we're living in accordance with our own navigational system that we have created with intention based off of who we know we can be, that responsibility, yes, it's big. Yes, it transcends, the horizontal. So we're not looking to the right and to the left to have people tell us who to be, but its impact is 100% horizontal. It impacts the person that we're ordering coffee from, the barista. It impacts the way we speak to our animals. It impacts the hotel clerk that I was just downstairs chatting with. It impacts every single area of our life. Even as small as I was in Walmart one day walking, and I picked up a pair of shoes that I was going to get, and then later on I found a different pair, and I put my pair that I was going to get right on the hook where I grabbed the other one, because Walmart, I don't know if you all have been there recently, but a lot of times it's chaos. It's like things are everywhere. But then as I did that, when I was putting the shoes that I had initially picked up in the wrong place, I was like, you know what? That's not who I want to be. I want to be someone who is a good steward and actually makes every place that I'm in better. So I went back and put them in their proper position. No one's watching. It's those tiny, tiny moments that seem so insignificant, and those little decisions that we make that either align us further with who we say we want to be or lead us a little bit, inching us further, just a little bit away from that target. And it's like if you've got two rocket ships about to take off, and one is just slightly leaning this way, while at first blush you see they're both kind of heading in the same direction, but over time, the course correction, they're going to veer off in very far different areas, even if one's just 1 degree or 2 degrees slightly off. So every single decision we make alters the course of our life. And frankly, I, even just over the last 2 weeks, and I'll just be perfectly honest with you guys, I have wanted to and plan to wake up every morning at 5 a.m. this whole year. That's my goal. And I have been. I've gotten up, done either like a quick meditation or a quick workout, and I've gone right back to bed. But that's kind of defeating the purpose of waking up at 5 and using that time in the morning that has proven so many times to be sacred for me. That's my time for me. And that's my time to not just get aligned, but do the things that I know that I need to do to further my mission that I feel called to. And so my challenge, even just tonight, as I was sitting outside looking at the stars, I was like, okay, if I know these steps and these decisions get me closer to my target and closer to the aim and direction of where I'm headed, then man, if I'm not actually living in accordance with those things that I know are good for me, then I am making intentional choices to veer off course. And so that's what radical responsibility is. It's yes to know where we're heading, but then agency, and this is kind of the second part. So radical responsibility is our inner work, and then activating agency is the external manifestation of that. Am I actually living and designing my life so that I'm moving closer and closer to the target that I say I want? I either need to change my beliefs or change my behaviors if my responsibility and agency are not in alignment. I can make all this internal change and say all these internal beliefs that I hold, but if my behavior isn't a reflection of that, then something's wrong. There's not a consistency. There's not even predictability. Like if I'm not living predictable in terms of the congruency between my beliefs and behaviors, then I need to look in the mirror. And so tonight I did that. I looked in the mirror and saw that I say I want to wake up at 5 or even earlier. And I know that this for me is one of the most impactful practices of my life, but I'm not doing it. Then either I really don't believe it or I need to change my behavior. So with that, I just want to take a quick pause. Willie, I just saw you join on Instagram. Thank you so much for joining. I love what you said. The director and producer of your next act. Write the plot and act the role you wish to be. So, so profoundly good. I had this moment one morning this year, well, I guess 2025, where I woke up and I was laying in bed and I thought, what would the role look like if I was to play the part of someone who is grateful? And that just totally reoriented my day. If I want to be a person who is grateful, what does that role look like? And it was fun to think of that. You know, it was fun to kind of play into that. And like, if I was to really be the author of my life, who are the characters and roles that I actually need to play in order to be that person? And with that comes that's where integration comes in. Then it's like, okay, taking that existential concept of, if I want to play the role of this person, then it becomes super practical of, what are the habits, behaviors that I need to instill and begin implementing in my life to further that forward. Willie, you just said, what is needed at night so that the morning start time is met? Yes. Yes. What is needed? So the night before, tonight, I actually have my alarm set for 4 a.m. because I'm flying out to go visit a client in St. Louis. And I know that I need to go to bed very soon because otherwise my 4 a.m. wake up is going to be so rough. And then you continue to say, create the system to achieve your goals. As you speak, so it shall be. The mirror is a reflection, but your voice shares your choice. Ooh, I love that. That's so good. Y'all, it's so, so, so true. So this whole concept of speaking out, when I wrote my eulogy, I changed it from being Christine was, as though other people are saying it, to I am. So I changed it from past tense to present tense, and from third person to first person. I am. And then I would read out who I want to be and speak that out for my life. And then, in addition to speaking it out, it's, what are the systems that I need to have in place to live accordingly? Just taking a quick look here at some of the other chats here. Man, y'all, there's a lot happening on YouTube. There's a lot happening. But thank you all so much for joining. Rainbows, thank you for coming on here. Again, thanks for coming on. Trainwreck, Dallas. Y'all, there's something around this concept of living free and how to do that. Systems and structures are actually so important in order to live free. Jocko Willink, who was a Navy SEAL and turned author and motivational speaker, said discipline equals freedom. And so if we truly want to be free, it's not about abiding by those laws of how I should live dictated by other people, but instead it's implementing the structures and frameworks and containers of time every single day so that I am living in accordance with who I want to be. And yeah, there's going to be some shoulds there as a result. Like, for example, I know that if I'm waking up at 5 or earlier, my day is going to look very different than if I wake up later in the day. So technically 5 a.m. is a should, but it's by my own design. And so when we start actually taking control of our lives to create our own structure, to create our own ideal that we're aiming for, no longer is it actually someone else speaking it in, this is how you should live. It's my choice. And that's where it's a little bit scary, because now if I don't live in accordance to that, it's my fault. I actually have no one else to blame other than myself. And that's where a lot of times it's easier to play the victim, because now we have someone to blame. Now we have an excuse for why we're not where we said that we want to be. So with this whole question of, how do I live free, and how do I escape from that entrapment of feeling like, honestly, it's not even just a victim, it's feeling powerless. I realized that another way that I was living not free was because I struggled with codependency for a while in my 20s. I really was looking to other people, whereas if they were doing well, if they were happy, then okay, cool, I did a good job. And that can take any form, whether it's our partner or it's our boss or it's our customers or clients. Anyone else who has the power to dictate whether we're successful or not, we have effectively put them at the pinnacle of our mountain. And we're now looking to them, looking up to them. Am I doing good? Rather than my own ideal being at the pinnacle and the hierarchy of my value system. So if my own ideal, and I've created a navigational system accordingly, is at the hierarchy and the pinnacle of that mountain, now I'm navigating north rather than having effectively a broken compass and navigating with it or magnetized east and west. So the key to freedom is by taking the time to orient our lives in accordance with who we want to be, with who we uniquely are, and who you were uniquely created to be in the first place. And in that process of doing that, there's a unlearning and an undoing of some of the things that we need to let go of. There's a book by David Hawkins called Letting Go that has just been so helpful for me. It's really about letting go of all of these kind of lower tier emotions, and even letting go of the hold that someone else may have over us by their own emotions. But me just being so fixated on where I'm going, where I'm headed, what are my goals, what am I looking and leaning towards, and then operating within the structure that supports me getting there. So just taking a quick look at some of the comments here. Christopher, thank you for joining. I love what you said. You said, take accountability and find humility, seek the kingdom and its righteousness. I love that. And that's part of the power of believing that Christ is in me. There's a power inside, but if we're constantly looking externally and looking outward, we're actually relinquishing the power that we already have. So much. Someone said this, and I just, actually, a lot of people have said this, and it never really resonated until I really realized that there's power within me to harness and leverage. It's people will say you already have what you need. And I didn't really understand that until I realized, oh my gosh, I really do. I have everything I need. I have the power of God within me. And so when you're saying seek first the kingdom, it's like, yes, God's inside us. And in so doing, in so activating the kingdom, we're then bringing the kingdom of and the presence of God to everyone around us. And it's so powerful. And there's something in that process of really activating it where it's like the law of attraction. We actually start seeing things coming towards us that further us in our mission. We talk about people who are so lucky, and it's like, well, maybe so. I think that is possible, or are they really just living in accordance with their own navigational system, navigating north? And then they're attracting the right things that are going to be supporting them in their mission because they're so laser focused. I like the analogy of a horse where they've got blinders on, because a lot of times horses can get freaked out or get scared by something coming up around them or on the sides. But man, if they've got blinders on, they're focused. They're not distracted. They're not easily swayed. And they're not at risk. Like, there's actually a protection around them just by having those blinders on. They're so laser focused on their target, and they're not going to be easily knocked off course. So with this whole concept of how I initially started, when I was sitting outside this evening looking at the sky, and I just saw these 3 planes so high up in the sky, I thought that they were stars. Man, there's something about our willingness in walking in freedom that actually does elevate us to this higher level of orbit. But it can also be, it can either be one that's lonely, like a lonely journey, or we can find ourselves other people who are operating at that same high level of orbit because they're so clear, they have their own navigational system, and they know where they're going, and they know how to get there. That doesn't mean we don't need people. In fact, what a blessing to have other people in our orbit as we're operating at that level. Man, do we need people, but it's the right people, and it's understanding their proper place in our lives so that we're not so oriented towards them, but we're oriented towards our own north, and then they're operating at their north, and then we get to collaborate and share what's working, what's not. Willie, I just saw you share. Who is this? You said he spoke to our team a few months ago. Oh, 𝐥𝐢𝐸. Oh my gosh, I love that he spoke to your team. That's so cool. I would love to. Actually, I think he was speaking at an event I was speaking at too, but I didn't get a chance to see him. It's AMDM, DAM. You don't need a church to get what you want. You only need a strong mind. It's so interesting you say that. I'm not on here to say don't ever go to church. That's not my goal. My goal is that we have what we need within us. And then if church is the place where you can go find those people that are navigating pointed north, operating in their own orbit according to their own navigational system, cool, let's go. And sometimes we'll have similar and overlapping navigational systems. For example, my belief that Christ is in me is a part of my navigational system. So there will be other people who believe that too, and then live accordingly, and then we collaborate together. So if a church or a religious setting is where you find that, great. I think that that's so important. And then for me, I actually find that my best times with God are in the quiet of the morning. Um, Roscoe, I just saw you say, I have not talked to God since I lost my wife back in February. I guess I'm a little confused about the whole situation. Oh my gosh, I literally feel that in my stomach. Roscoe, I really when my brother-in-law was killed, I just could not like I was still kind of at a point in my life where I was going to church regularly. And what I found is that when I was most broken, the church was the last place I wanted to go. And just the churches that I attended. But personally with God, I really had to fight it out with him. I really, really did. And just be like, what the heck? My sister had a 3-week-old baby girl when her husband was killed by a drunk driver. And it was just devastating. And I don't think that I didn't have any kind of navigational system to allow for something like that to happen. I didn't understand, and I was just so incredibly broken, and I really contended with God and like fought it out with him. And because what I realized in that moment was clearly my belief about who God was at the time was wrong. And so because the God I knew wouldn't let this happen. And I realized so many things in that process, and I'm cheering you on, and I'm so sorry about you losing your wife. My sister, when she lost her husband, it took years of her own confrontation with God and her own moving through and figuring out what is real and what do I believe. And y'all, I think that one of the reasons why determining our own navigational system is so important is so that when these moments happen, we're not left completely broken. Because if we ask the questions, if we do the work ahead of time, it doesn't mean that we won't still be broken, but we're not completely demolished to the point of almost like being immovable. Like, how do I want to say it? I think it's like demolished to the point of no return, where we're now useless, and and actually someone I know, he lost his son, and he's like a figment of a person. Like he's not even alive, really. And in one sense, you ask the question, like, well, how can you even recover after such a loss? And tonight, as I was writing my book, I just realized that one of the things that I really regret around losing my brother-in-law was that I contended with God, but I didn't actually contend with what was really truly going on inside me. I was actually still looking external. I was looking up at God, fighting with him, rather than actually going inward. And there's a concept around pouring out our soul and like really being so honest, where we are offering laments, like lamenting and verbally, even if it's quietly, but just like letting out all of the grief that's within us. Because if we don't, it stays trapped inside us. And then we can't ever really get something new, because we're just flooded with the old, and we're flooded with so much grief. But in the pouring out, there's also a releasing of it. And releasing the grief does not mean that we release the person. And that was something I didn't understand. I actually held on tightly to the grief of my brother-in-law for like 6.5 years, because I thought I wanted to honor him. But I didn't realize that in releasing the grief and living fully, that was a way to honor him too. I didn't think both could coexist. And so the process of releasing and pouring out the soul, that's where I found so much freedom as well, freedom to live. And he was the most vibrant person I've ever met. And he was just so full of life, so full of ambitions. And so if I really want to honor him, maybe it actually is in the living of life to the fullest. So I'm really, thank you for sharing that, because that's just so incredibly painful. I'm just checking in with some of the chats. James Dillon, I just saw your chat. I'm just looking at some of this stuff. Y'all, thank you so much for joining tonight. I really believe that the pursuit of freedom is probably one of the best of all pursuits we could possibly take up and take on in this life. Why are we here otherwise? to live subservient to somebody else, to live in quiet submission to someone else's system or someone else's expectation or obligation for us. The moment we really choose and decide to live free is the moment that I think we actually do become free. Sure, there's going to be things that we have to let go of and release and move away from, and that process is hard work. But I really have found it for myself to be so true that sometimes it's just the choice. Am I willing to be free? Am I willing to stop blaming other people for how I'm turning out and how my life is going? Am I willing to assume radical responsibility for my own internal state? And then on the other side of that, I can activate agency over myself and start making decisions in alignment with who I want to be. So with that, thank you all so much for joining, and I will see you tomorrow morning. I am flying during my normal show time for A Course in Miracles, and so I'm going to be going live around probably between 4 and 4:30 a.m. Eastern. So you can join me then. Otherwise, I will be on again tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern for The Knowing Show. So in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I will talk with you tomorrow.